The dust kicked up from the wagon wheels as Jake and Martha Henderson rode toward their new life in the Arizona Territory. It was 1882, and the siblings had just spent their last $20 on a broken-down ranch that nobody else wanted. The previous owner had warned them about Apache raids, drought, and cattle rustlers, but the Henderson siblings had nowhere else to go. Jake was 25, tall and lean with calloused hands from years of farm work back in Missouri. His sister Martha was 3 years younger, with determined brown eyes and a stubborn streak that matched her brother's. Their parents had died of fever the previous winter, leaving them with debts that swallowed up the family farm. This ranch in Arizona was their only chance to start over. The property sat in a valley surrounded by red rock formations and scattered pine trees. The main house was little more than a wooden shack with holes in the roof, and the barn looked ready to collapse at the first strong wind. A small creek ran through the property, which was the only reason Jake thought they might have a chance at making it work. "Well, Martha, what do you think?" Jake asked as they climbed down from the wagon. Martha looked around at the desolate landscape and the ramshackle buildings. "I think we'd better get to work if we want to survive the winter," she said practically. They spent their first weeks patching the roof, fixing the barn door, and clearing brush from around the buildings. Their nearest neighbors were 15 miles away, and the closest town was a 2-day ride. The isolation was complete, but they were used to hard work and solitude. 3 weeks into their new life, Jake was repairing fence posts when he heard Martha scream from the direction of the creek. He dropped his tools and ran toward the sound, expecting to find a rattlesnake or maybe a bear. Instead, he found his sister kneeling beside a small figure lying unconscious on the creek bank. It was a young Apache girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing a torn leather dress and covered in cuts and bruises. Her long black hair was matted with blood and she was barely breathing. Martha was already checking her pulse when Jake arrived. "She's alive, but just barely," Martha whispered. "Look at these wounds, Jake. Someone hurt this child badly." Jake looked around nervously. Everyone in the territory knew that Apache raids had been increasing lately. The army was constantly chasing war parties through these mountains, and settlers had been told to shoot any Apache on sight. Finding this girl on their property could mean trouble from both sides. "Martha, we can't get involved in this," Jake said quietly. "You know what people say about the Apache. If anyone finds out we helped her." "She's a child, Jake," Martha said firmly, lifting the girl in her arms. "I don't care what people say. We're not leaving a hurt child to die." They carried the girl into the house and laid her on Martha's bed. Martha cleaned her wounds while Jake boiled water and tore up an old shirt for bandages. The girl had a deep gash on her head, cuts on her arms and legs, and what looked like bullet graze on her shoulder. For 3 days, the girl drifted in and out of consciousness, speaking occasionally in Apache. Martha stayed by her side, feeding her broth and changing her bandages. Jake kept watch outside, worried that Apache warriors might come looking for her, or worse, that army patrols might discover her presence. On the 4th morning, the girl opened her eyes and looked directly at Martha. She tried to sit up, but Martha gently pushed her back down. "Easy there," Martha said softly. "You're safe now. My name is Martha, and this is my brother Jake." The girl stared at them with dark, intelligent eyes. She spoke a few words in Apache, then tried English. Why you help me?" Martha smiled. "Because you needed help. What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Ayanna. It means eternal blossom. That's a beautiful name," Martha said. "Can you tell us what happened to you, Ayanna?" The girl's face darkened and she turned away. For several minutes, she didn't speak. Finally, she said, "Soldiers came to our camp. They killed everyone. My grandmother, my mother, my little brother. I ran, but they shot at me. I fell in the creek and the water carried me far away." Jake and Martha exchanged glances. They had heard rumors about army attacks on Apache camps, but the official reports always claimed they were fighting warriors, not families. "Where is your father?" Jake asked gently. "He was hunting with the other men," Ayanna said, tears flowing down her cheeks. "When he comes back, he will find only bodies." Martha took the girl's hand. "I'm so sorry, Ayanna. No child should have to see such things." Over the next week, Ayanna slowly regained her strength. Martha taught her more English words, and Ayanna taught Martha some Apache phrases. Jake remained wary, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. but he couldn't help being touched by the girl's resilience. Ayanna proved to be quick to learn and eager to help with daily tasks. She showed Martha which desert plants were edible and which ones could be used for medicine. She helped Jake track a mountain lion that had been killing their chickens, demonstrating skills that amazed both siblings. "She's like a little ghost in the desert," Jake told Martha one evening. "I've never seen anyone move so quietly or read tracks so well." "She's been taught to survive," Martha replied. "Her people have been living in this land for hundreds of years. We could learn a lot from her." 2 weeks after finding Ayanna, Jake spotted riders approaching from the east. His blood went cold when he recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. There were 6 of them, led by a sergeant with a thick mustache and mean eyes. "Stay inside with the girl," Jake whispered to Martha. "Don't let them see her." Jake walked out to meet the soldiers, his heart pounding. The sergeant reined in his horse and looked around the property with suspicion. "Morning," the sergeant said curtly. "I'm Sergeant Morrison, 3rd Cavalry. We're tracking Apache raiders through this area. You seen any sign of them?" "No, sir," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Haven't seen any Indians around here." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that, boy? We followed tracks to that creek of yours. Found blood on the rocks downstream. Looked like someone was hurt pretty bad." Jake shrugged. "Could have been an animal. Lots of predators around here. Mountain lions, bears, coyotes." The sergeant studied Jake's face for a long moment, then looked toward the house. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be safe." "I'd rather you didn't," Jake said, standing straighter. "This is private property and you don't have a warrant." Morrison's hand moved to his pistol. "Son, we're hunting dangerous savages who killed innocent people. You wouldn't want to be seen as interfering with army business, would you?" Before Jake could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway, holding a shotgun. "Gentlemen, you're not welcome here," she said calmly. "My brother told you we haven't seen any Indians, and that should be enough for you." The sergeant looked at Martha with surprise, then broke into a nasty grin. Well, looks like we got ourselves some Indian lovers here, boys." The other soldiers chuckled, but Jake noticed they were all watching Martha's shotgun carefully. His sister might be small, but everyone in the territory knew that frontier women didn't carry guns unless they knew how to use them. "You folks are making a big mistake," Morrison said. "The Apache are murderous animals. They'll kill you both without thinking twice about it. When that happens, don't come crying to the army for help. We'll take our chances," Martha said firmly. The sergeant spat in the dust and wheeled his horse around. "Let's go, men. But we'll be keeping an eye on this place. Mark my words." As the soldiers rode away, Jake and Martha stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Inside the house, they found Ayanna crouched in the corner, trembling with fear. "It's all right," Martha said, kneeling beside her. "They're gone. They will come back," Ayanna whispered. "They always come back." That night, as they sat around the dinner table, Ayanna spoke more about her past than she ever had before. She told them about her father, a respected war chief named Cochise the Younger, and about the traditional ways of her people. She described the sacred mountains and the stories her grandmother used to tell. "My people believe that every person has a path to walk," she said. "Maybe my path was supposed to bring me to you." Martha smiled and squeezed the girl's hand. "Maybe it was, sweetheart. Maybe it was." Outside, the desert wind howled through the rocks, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. The Henderson siblings had made their choice, and there would be no turning back. They were now a family of 3, bound together by circumstances and strengthened by an unlikely love that would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Winter came early to the Arizona territory that year, bringing with it challenges that tested the Henderson family's resolve. Ayanna had been with them for 2 months, and the bond between the 3 had grown stronger with each passing day. The Apache girl had proven herself invaluable, teaching Jake and Martha survival skills that their Missouri upbringing had never provided. She showed them how to track game through the rocky terrain, how to find water in the driest seasons, and how to read weather patterns by watching the behavior of birds and animals. In return, Martha taught her to read and write English, while Jake showed her how to repair tools and work with horses. The first real test came when their small herd of cattle began disappearing. Jake would count 20 head one day and find only 15 the next. At first, he blamed mountain lions or bears, but Ayanna's sharp eyes found human footprints near the missing cattle. "Not Apache," she said after studying the tracks carefully. "These are white men's boots. They came at night, took 3 cattle and drove them east toward the mining camps. Jake felt his anger rising. They could barely afford to lose a single head of cattle, and rustlers were stealing their future 1 cow at a time. "We need to do something about this," he told Martha. "What can we do?" Martha replied practically, "There's 3 of us and no telling how many of them. Besides, we can't leave Ayana here alone while we go chasing after cattle thieves." Ayana looked up from the leather she was working on. "I know these lands better than any white rustler," she said quietly. "I can help you get your cattle back." Jake shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous and you're just a child." "I am not just a child," Ayana said with dignity. "Among my people, I would already be considered old enough to ride with war parties. I know every canyon, every hidden trail, every waterhole for 50 miles in any direction." Martha considered this. She had learned to respect Ayana's knowledge and instincts. The girl had already saved them from a flash flood by recognizing the signs of distant rainfall, and her ability to predict the weather had helped them prepare for the harsh winter. "What do you have in mind?" Martha asked. Ayana spread out a piece of bark and began drawing a map with a piece of charcoal. "The rustlers are taking cattle to the mining camps near Copper Creek. There is only one trail that wagons can use to get there from our valley, but I know a shorter path through the mountains. If we move fast, we can get there before them and set a trap." Jake studied the crude map. He knew the area Ayana was describing, but he had never considered the mountain route because it looked impassable for horses. "Are you sure we can get through there?" "I traveled that path with my father many times," Ayana assured him. "It is narrow, but horses can make it. And there is a place where the trail goes through a canyon with only one way in or out. If we wait there, the rustlers will have to come to us." The plan was risky, but they were desperate. That very night, they saddled their 3 horses and set out following Ayana's mountain trail. The girl led them through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate without her knowledge. They climbed steep rocky paths in complete darkness, trusting Ayana's ability to find the way. By dawn, they reached the canyon Ayana had described. It was perfect for an ambush, a narrow passage between high rock walls with nowhere to run. They concealed themselves behind boulders and waited. Around noon, they heard the sound of cattle and men's voices echoing off the canyon walls. 5 rustlers appeared, driving a dozen head of cattle that included several of the Hendersons' animals. The men were laughing and joking, completely unaware of the danger ahead. Jake stepped out from behind his hiding place, rifle raised. "That's far enough, gentlemen," he called out. The rustlers reined in their horses, startled and angry. Their leader, a bearded man with a scar across his left cheek, spat tobacco juice and glared at Jake. "You're making a big mistake, farm boy. There's 5 of us and only 1 of you." "Actually, there's 3 of us," Martha said, appearing from behind another boulder with her shotgun trained on the group. The rustlers looked around nervously, trying to spot the 3rd person. One of them started to reach for his pistol but froze when an arrow suddenly appeared in the ground at his horse's feet. They looked up to see Ayana standing on a ledge 20 feet above them, another arrow already knocked and ready to fly. "Holy hell," one of the rustlers whispered. "That's an Apache kid." The leader's face turned pale. Everyone in the territory had heard stories about Apache warriors and their deadly accuracy with bows and arrows. "Now hold on," he said, raising his hands slowly. "We can work this out. We was just moving some strays we found wandering around. Those strays have our brand on them," Jake said coldly, "and I'm sure the Army would be very interested to know about cattle thieves operating in this area. Sergeant Morrison seemed particularly concerned about law and order when he visited us last month." At the mention of Morrison's name, the rustlers exchanged worried glances. They knew that stealing cattle was a hanging offense in the Arizona territory. "What do you want?" the leader asked. "Our cattle back and a promise that you'll stay away from our property," Jake replied. "In exchange, we'll let you ride out of here instead of turning you over to the cavalry." The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Finally, the leader nodded grudgingly. "Cut out your cattle and take them." "But this ain't over, Henderson. We know where you live." "So do the Apache," Ayana called down from her perch, her young voice carrying clearly in the still air. "And they do not forget their friends or their enemies." The rustlers quickly separated the Henderson cattle from the rest and rode away without another word. As their hoofbeats faded into the distance, Ayana climbed down from her perch with the grace of a mountain cat. "That was incredible," Martha said, hugging the girl. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" My father taught me, Ayanna replied simply. He said a warrior must be able to protect what is important. The journey back to the ranch gave them time to talk about what had happened. Jake realized that he had been thinking of Ayanna as a child who needed protection, but she had just proven that she was capable of protecting others. You saved our cattle and probably our lives today, he told her as they rode through the desert twilight. We are family, Ayanna replied. Family protects each other. Over the following weeks, word of the incident spread through the territory. The story grew in the telling, and soon people were talking about the Apache girl, who could put an arrow wherever she wanted it, and the brave siblings who had adopted her. Some settlers thought they were crazy, but others began to respect the unusual family. The respect was tested when a group of Apache warriors appeared at their ranch one morning. Jake's heart nearly stopped when he saw them sitting their horses near the creek, painted for war and heavily armed. Martha gripped her shotgun, but Ayanna walked outside calmly to meet them. The warriors spoke with her in Apache for several minutes. Jake and Martha watched tensely, unable to understand the conversation but seeing the serious expressions on everyone's faces. Finally, the leader of the war party rode forward. He was a tall man with gray in his long hair and scars on his chest that spoke of many battles. When he looked at Jake and Martha, his dark eyes showed both intelligence and a deep sadness. I am Cochise the Younger, he said in careful English. This girl is my daughter. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Cochise the Younger was one of the most feared Apache war chiefs in the territory. The army had been hunting him for years, and there was a $1,000 bounty on his head. She tells me you saved her life, Cochise continued. She tells me you have treated her as your own child, taught her your language, shared your food and shelter. She's a good girl, Martha said, finding her voice. We love her like our own sister. Cochise studied Martha's face for a long moment. My daughter says she wishes to stay with you. She says her path now lies with your people, not mine. Ayanna stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Apache. Her father listened, then nodded slowly. When she finished, he dismounted and walked over to Jake and Martha. Among my people, when a life is saved, a debt is created, he said solemnly. You have saved my daughter's life and given her a new family when I could not protect her. This makes you part of our family as well. He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out 2 small objects, beautifully carved bone pendants on leather cords. These are protection symbols, he explained, placing one around each of their necks. They will tell any Apache warrior that you are under the protection of Cochise the Younger. No harm will come to you or your property from my people. Jake looked at the pendant, feeling its weight and the smoothness of the carved bone. Thank you, he said simply. We'll take good care of her. I know you will, Cochise replied. She has chosen her path and I must respect that choice. But remember this, she is still Apache. Do not let her forget who she is. The war chief mounted his horse and prepared to leave with his men. As they rode away, Ayanna called out something in Apache. Her father turned and called back, then continued on without looking back again. What did you say to him? Martha asked gently. I told him I would make him proud, Ayanna replied, tears streaming down her face. And he told me to be strong and remember that I carry the blood of warriors. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ayanna told them more about her father and her people's history. She spoke of the long wars with the Mexican and American armies, of the gradual loss of their traditional lands, and of the desperate struggle to maintain their way of life. My father fights because he has no choice, she explained. But fighting will not bring back the old days. I want to learn new ways that might help my people survive in this changing world. Jake and Martha understood then that they were not just raising a child, they were helping to shape someone who might one day bridge the gap between 2 very different worlds. It was a responsibility that both humbled and frightened them. As winter deepened, their little family settled into new routines. Ayanna continued to learn English and the skills she would need to survive in white society, but she also maintained her Apache traditions. She would often stand on the ridge behind their house at sunset, singing softly in her native language, prayers for her lost family and hopes for the future. The cattle rustlers never returned, and word of their protection by Cochise the Younger spread throughout the territory. Other Apache bands began to leave them alone, and some settlers started seeking their advice about dealing with the local tribes. Jake and Martha realized that their lives had changed completely from what they had expected when they first arrived in Arizona. They were no longer just struggling ranchers trying to make a living. They had become something unique, a bridge between two cultures in a land where such bridges were desperately needed. 5 years had passed since Ayanna first came to live with the Henderson siblings, and the Arizona territory was changing rapidly. The railroad had reached Tucson, bringing more settlers, merchants, and opportunities. Mining camps were springing up throughout the mountains, and the army was building new forts to protect the growing population. Ayanna, now 15, had grown into a remarkable young woman who moved easily between two worlds. She could read and write better than most settlers, help Martha with the increasingly complex business of running their expanded ranch, and still track a deer through terrain that would challenge the most experienced Apache hunter. Their ranch had prospered beyond Jake and Martha's wildest dreams. The protection they enjoyed from Apache raids, combined with Ayanna's knowledge of the best grazing areas and water sources, had allowed them to build one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. They now employed 6 men and owned over 500 head of cattle, but success brought new challenges. As their wealth and influence grew, so did the attention from territorial officials and military commanders. Sergeant Morrison, now promoted to lieutenant, had made several more visits to their ranch, always claiming to be investigating Apache activity, but clearly trying to gather information about their relationship with the tribes. The situation came to a head on a hot summer morning when a cavalry patrol rode up to the ranch, house flying a white flag. Jake and Martha came out to meet them, with Ayanna staying inside as they had learned to do when soldiers visited. The patrol was led by a young captain named William Hayes, fresh from West Point and full of military bearing. Unlike the crude Morrison, Hayes was polite and well-educated, but his message was equally troubling. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," he began, then corrected himself when Jake explained that Martha was his sister, not his wife. "I apologize, Mr. Henderson, Miss Henderson. I'm Captain Hayes, and I'm here on orders from Colonel Bradford at Fort Apache." "What can we do for you, Captain?" Martha asked cordially, though Jake noticed her hand resting on the shotgun leaning against the porch rail. "I'll be direct with you," Hayes said. "There are reports that you're harboring an Apache fugitive on your property. Specifically, we have information that the daughter of the war chief Cochise the Younger is living here." Jake kept his expression neutral. "That's an interesting rumor, Captain. Who told you that?" Hayes glanced at his sergeant, a weathered man who looked uncomfortable. "The source isn't important. What matters is that harboring enemy combatants is a federal crime. If these reports are true, you could both face charges of treason." Martha stepped forward, her brown eyes flashing with anger. "Captain Hayes, my brother and I have been law-abiding citizens since we arrived in this territory. We've never helped any Apache warriors or interfered with army operations. In fact, our ranch has been repeatedly praised by territorial officials as a model of frontier development." The captain nodded. "Yes, I've read those reports. Your success has been remarkable, but success doesn't excuse violations of federal law." He paused, studying their faces. "May I ask how you've managed to avoid Apache raids when other ranches in this area have been attacked repeatedly?" Jake had prepared for this question. "We treat the local tribes with respect, Captain. We don't trespass on their sacred sites. We don't hunt in areas they consider their territory. And we don't shoot every Indian we see on sight like some settlers do." "An admirable approach," Hayes admitted, "but it doesn't explain the specific reports we've received. Would you object to a search of your property?" Before Jake could answer, Ayanna appeared in the doorway. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening, and she made a decision that surprised everyone. "There's no need for a search, Captain," she said in perfect English. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Cochise the Younger. These people saved my life and raised me as their own child." Captain Hayes stared at her in shock. He had expected to find a wild Apache girl hiding in the hills, not this poised young woman who spoke like an educated white person. His sergeant's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Hayes held up a restraining hand. "Miss Ayanna," he said carefully, "you're under arrest for being an enemy combatant on United States territory." "No, she's not," Martha said firmly, stepping between the captain and Ayanna. "She was 10 years old when she came here, Captain. She's never fought against the army or committed any crimes. She's been living peacefully on our ranch for 5 years, learning to read and write, helping with our cattle, and becoming a productive member of society." Hayes looked genuinely troubled. This was clearly not the situation he had expected to find. Miss Henderson, I understand your feelings, but the law is the law. This woman is the daughter of a wanted war criminal. This woman is an American citizen by adoption, Jake said, producing a document from his pocket. We had the proper papers filed in Tucson 3 years ago. Ayanna Henderson is legally our adopted daughter. The captain examined the adoption papers, frowning. These papers won't protect her if the Army considers her a security threat. Ayanna stepped forward calmly. Captain Hayes, may I ask what you know about my father's recent activities? Hayes seemed surprised by the question. Your father is one of the most wanted men in the territory. His band has been responsible for numerous attacks on settlers and Army patrols. When was the last confirmed attack by my father's band? Ayanna asked. The captain thought for a moment. There was an ambush near Silver Creek about 6 months ago. Before that? Well, there have been several incidents over the past 2 years. Captain, my father's band hasn't attacked anyone in over a year, Ayanna said quietly. The incidents you're thinking of were carried out by other Apache groups, probably Chiricahua warriors from Mexico who cross the border to raid and then disappear back across the Rio Grande. Hayes looked skeptical. How could you possibly know that? Because I still maintain contact with Apache scouts who work for the Army. They know which bands are responsible for which attacks. My father has been trying to negotiate a peace treaty with the territorial government for the past 18 months. This was news to Captain Hayes. A peace treaty? I haven't heard anything about negotiations. That's because territorial officials don't want to admit they're talking to Apache leaders, Ayanna explained. It would make them look weak to voters back east. But the talks have been happening, conducted through intermediaries like Army scouts and Indian agents. Jake watched the captain's face as he processed this information. Hayes was clearly an intelligent man who was beginning to realize that the situation was far more complex than his orders had suggested. Miss Henderson, Miss Ayanna, even if what you're saying is true, I still have orders to bring you in for questioning, Hayes said reluctantly. Then I'll come with you voluntarily, Ayanna replied, but I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. I'm listening. Ayanna straightened to her full height, and for a moment, Jake could see the warrior blood she carried. Instead of arresting me as an enemy combatant, why don't you hire me as a scout and translator? The Army is always looking for people who can communicate with the Apache tribes and understand their customs. Hayes raised an eyebrows. You'd be willing to work for the Army against your own people? I'd be willing to work for peace, Ayanna corrected. The Apache people are dying, Captain. Every year, more of our young men are killed in raids that accomplish nothing. More women and children die from starvation, as we're driven from our traditional hunting grounds. The old ways of fighting cannot win against your Army's numbers and weapons. She paused, looking directly into Hayes's eyes. But neither can your Army win through violence alone. You've been fighting Apache bands for 30 years, and there are still warriors in these mountains who will never surrender. The only real victory is peace. And peace requires people who can talk to both sides. Captain Hayes was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, he turned to his sergeant. Sergeant Williams, what's your opinion of this situation? The older soldier, who had been listening carefully to the entire conversation, spoke up. Sir, I've been fighting Apache for 15 years. In my experience, this young lady is probably the best chance we've got to end this war, without killing every Indian in the territory. Hayes nodded slowly. Miss Ayanna, if I were to recommend you for a position as Army scout and interpreter, would you be willing to use your connections to help arrange formal peace talks with your father? I would, Ayanna replied without hesitation. But I have conditions. Name them. First, no Apache will be forced to move to a reservation against their will. Second, any peace agreement must include guaranteed hunting rights in traditional territories. Third, Apache children who want to learn to read and write must be allowed to attend school without being forced to give up their cultural identity. Hayes whistled softly. Those are significant conditions. I can't promise the Army will agree to them. Then there will be no peace, Ayanna said simply. My people will continue fighting until every warrior is dead. And your Army will continue losing soldiers in these mountains for years to come. The captain looked around at the prosperous ranch, at Jake and Martha, who had clearly thrived by finding a way to coexist with the Apache, and at Ayanna, who represented something entirely new, a bridge between two worlds. I'll need to discuss this with Colonel Bradford, he said finally, but I'm willing to recommend that you be given a chance to prove your value as a peacemaker. rather than being arrested as an enemy. "Thank you, Captain," Martha said with relief. "You won't regret this decision." As the patrol prepared to leave, Captain Hayes pulled Jake aside. "Mr. Henderson, you've done something remarkable here. This young woman could be the key to ending decades of bloodshed. But you should know that not everyone in the Army or the territorial government will see it that way. There are people who profit from this war. Suppliers, contractors, politicians who build their careers on fighting Indians. They won't want peace," Jake nodded grimly. "We've already had some trouble with people who don't like our arrangement with the Apache. But Ayanna is family, Captain. We'll protect her no matter what." "You may need to do exactly that," Hayes warned. "Be careful who you trust." After the soldiers rode away, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. They all knew that their lives were about to change again, possibly more dramatically than ever before. "Are you sure about working with the Army?" Martha asked Ayanna. "It could be dangerous, and it will definitely be difficult." Ayanna smiled, the expression making her look both very young and very wise. "Martha, you and Jake took a chance on a wounded Apache child 5 years ago. That chance saved my life and gave me a family. Now it's time for me to take a chance. Not just for myself, but for all the Apache children who are growing up in a world where the old ways are dying." She looked out at the desert landscape she knew so well. "My father taught me that a true warrior fights for her people. You and Jake taught me that sometimes the greatest battles are won with words instead of weapons. Maybe it's time to combine those lessons." Jake reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide to do, we'll be right there with you." "I know you will," Ayanna replied. "That's what family does." In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and somewhere in the mountains, an Apache scout was already riding toward Cochise the Younger's camp with news that would change the course of history in the Arizona Territory. The young woman who had once been a dying child by a creek was about to become something unprecedented, an Apache diplomat in the service of both her birth people and her chosen family. The real test of everything she had learned in Two Worlds was about to begin. 2 weeks after Captain Hayes' visit, Ayanna received orders to report to Fort Apache for her first assignment as an Army scout and interpreter. The fort was a sprawling collection of adobe buildings surrounded by high walls, built to house over 300 soldiers and serve as the Army's primary base for operations against the Apache tribes. Colonel Bradford was a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and penetrating blue eyes. He had spent most of his career fighting Indians on the frontier, and he was clearly skeptical about this unusual new recruit. "Miss Henderson," he said, as Ayanna stood at attention in his office, "Captain Hayes tells me you believe you can help us end this Apache war. I hope you understand that many good soldiers have died trying to bring peace to this territory." "Yes, sir," Ayanna replied respectfully. "I knew some of those soldiers. They died because both sides have forgotten how to talk to each other. Fear and anger have replaced understanding." Colonel Bradford studied her carefully. "And you think you can change that?" "I think I can help translate more than just words, sir. I can help translate intentions and feelings. When an Apache warrior says something that sounds like a threat to white ears, it might actually be a statement of honor or a request for respect. When a soldier talks about military necessity, an Apache hears only death and destruction." The colonel leaned back in his chair. "Your first test will come sooner than expected. We captured 3 Apache warriors in a raid near Prescott last week. They won't talk to our interpreters, they just sit there and stare at the wall. I want you to try getting information from them." Ayanna felt her stomach tighten. She knew that captured Apache warriors often chose death rather than betraying their people. "What kind of information are you looking for, sir?" "The location of their main camp. We believe they're part of a band that's been raiding supply wagons on the Prescott Road. If we can find their base, we can end these attacks permanently." "And what happens to the warriors after I question them?" Bradford's expression hardened. "That depends on what we learn from them. If they cooperate, they'll be sent to the reservation. If they don't," he shrugged. Ayanna understood the implication. She was being asked to help extract information that could lead to the death or imprisonment of Apache warriors, possibly men she had known since childhood. It was exactly the kind of impossible choice she had hoped to avoid. "Sir, may I suggest a different approach?" "I'm listening." "Instead of interrogating these men as prisoners, what if we treated them as potential negotiators? Let me talk to them about the possibility of formal peace talks between their band and the Army. If they're willing to carry that message back to their chief, we could arrange a meeting under a flag of truce. Colonel Bradford laughed harshly. Miss Henderson, these are enemy combatants who were caught red-handed attacking American citizens. We don't negotiate with raiders and murderers. With respect, sir, every Apache warrior has been labeled a raider and murderer by the Army. But these men might also be fathers, brothers, and sons who are fighting because they see no other way to protect their families. If we can offer them a path to protection that doesn't require constant warfare, some might take it. The colonel was quiet for several minutes, considering her words. Finally, he stood up and walked to the window overlooking the fort's parade ground. Miss Henderson, I've been fighting Apache for 20 years. In that time, I've seen things that would give you nightmares. Apache raids on settlements where entire families were wiped out. Soldiers tortured to death in ways I won't describe. Women and children taken as captives and never seen again. He turned back to face her. But I've also seen what our soldiers have done to Apache camps. I've seen women and children killed because they were in the wrong place when we attacked. I've seen old men shot down while trying to surrender. This war has made monsters of good men on both sides. Ayanna waited quietly for him to continue. I'll give you one chance, Bradford said finally. Talk to these prisoners. But if they refuse to cooperate with peace overtures, then you'll help us get the military information we need. Is that understood? Yes, sir. The fort's guardhouse was a low adobe building with barred windows and a heavy wooden door. Inside, Ayanna found 3 Apache warriors sitting on the dirt floor of a cramped cell. They looked up when she entered, and she saw recognition in their eyes. The oldest warrior was a man named Nalnish, which meant he works in Apache. She had known him when she was a child. He had been one of her father's most trusted scouts. The other 2 were younger men she didn't recognize, but their facial tattoos identified them as Chiricahua Apache from the southern bands. Little sister, Nalnish said in Apache, using the childhood name her father's people had called her. What are you doing in this place of enemies? I am trying to find a path to peace, uncle, she replied, also speaking in Apache. The Army has offered me a chance to arrange talks between our people and their leaders. Nalnish spat on the ground. There can be no peace with men who murder children and steal our lands. And there can be no future for our people if we continue fighting a war we cannot win, Ayanna replied gently. How many of our young men have died in the past year? How many of our children have gone hungry because the warriors are always away fighting instead of hunting? The younger warriors muttered angrily, but Nalnish held up a hand for silence. You speak like a white woman now, little sister. Have you forgotten that you are Apache? I have forgotten nothing, Ayanna said firmly. I remember my grandmother's stories about the old days when our people lived freely in these mountains. I remember my mother's songs about the sacred places, but I also remember the sound of soldiers' guns killing everyone I loved. I remember running through the desert with blood on my clothes and nowhere to go. She moved closer to the bars. Uncle, I was saved by white people who treated me like their own daughter. They taught me that not all whites are enemies, just as not all Apache are warriors. Some of them want peace as much as we do. Nalnish studied her face for a long time. What are you asking of us, little sister? I'm asking you to carry a message to your chief. Tell him that there are men in the Army who are willing to talk about ending this war. Not surrender, negotiation. A way for our people to keep their dignity while finding safety for their families. And if we refuse, Ayanna's voice grew sad. Then you will be questioned by soldiers who care nothing for Apache honor. They will try to force you to reveal the location of your camp, so they can attack it with cannons and rifles. Many more of our people will die. The 3 warriors spoke quietly among themselves in Apache for several minutes. Finally, Nalnish looked back at Ayanna. If we agree to carry this message, what guarantee do we have that it is not a trap? You have my word, Ayanna said. And you have the word of Captain Hayes, who has agreed to meet with Apache representatives under a flag of truce at a neutral location. Where? The sacred springs near Canyon de Chelly. It is a place of power for our people, and the Army has agreed to respect its spiritual significance during any talks. Nalnish's eyes widened slightly. Canyon de Chelly was indeed a sacred place to the Apache, and the fact that the Army was willing to meet there suggested a level of respect that had been absent from previous negotiations. This Captain Hayes, is he a man of honor? I believe so, Ayanna replied. He could have arrested me as an enemy combatant, but instead he offered me a chance to work for peace. He listens when I speak, and he has shown respect for Apache customs. The oldest warrior made his decision. We will carry your message, little sister. But know this. If this proves to be a trick, if soldiers use these talks to locate our camps and attack our families, the blood will be on your hands as well as theirs. I understand. Uncle, I pray to the spirits of our ancestors that it will not come to that. When Ayanna reported back to Colonel Bradford, she told him that the prisoners had agreed to carry a message about peace talks to their chief. She did not mention the specific location they had discussed or the names of the Apache leaders involved. Bradford seemed satisfied that progress was being made. How long before we hear back from them? He asked. Apache decisions are not made quickly, sir. The chief will need to consult with his war council and possibly with other band leaders. It could take several weeks. We'll give them 1 month, Bradford decided. If we haven't heard anything by then, we'll assume they're not interested in peace and proceed with military action. Over the following weeks, Ayanna worked to prepare for the potential negotiations. She studied Army regulations and territorial law to understand what concessions might be legally possible. She also used her connections with Apache scouts to gather intelligence about which bands might be willing to consider peace and which ones were determined to fight to the death. The work was emotionally exhausting. Every day she received reports of new raids and Army responses. Apache warriors attacked a mining camp near Globe, killing 6 men. Soldiers retaliated by destroying an Apache village, killing 12 people including 5 children. The cycle of violence seemed endless. 3 weeks after the captured warriors were released, an Apache scout brought word that Cochise the Younger wanted to meet with his daughter. The message specified a time and place, sunset at the Red Rocks near the Henderson Ranch. When Ayanna told Jake and Martha about the meeting, they insisted on coming with her. "We're still your family," Martha said firmly. "If you're going to meet with your father about ending a war, we're going to be there to support you." They rode out to the Red Rocks as the sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Cochise the Younger was waiting for them with 2 other Apache leaders, an elderly man named Geronimo and a younger chief called Victorio. Ayanna's heart raced as she saw her father for the first time in over 2 years. He looked older, with more gray in his hair and new lines around his eyes. The weight of leading his people through desperate times had aged him. "My daughter," he said simply, dismounting from his horse, "you have chosen a difficult path." "All paths are difficult now, father," she replied. "But some lead to survival while others lead only to death." Cochise nodded to Jake and Martha with respect. "You have raised my daughter well. She has grown wise in the years she has lived with you." "She's taught us more than we ever taught her," Jake replied honestly. The Apache chief studied Jake's face. "The soldiers tell me you have offered to help arrange peace talks. Why would white ranchers involve themselves in Apache affairs?" Martha stepped forward. "Because we've learned that our affairs and Apache affairs are connected, Chief Cochise. When there's war in this territory, everyone suffers. When there's peace, everyone benefits. And because Ayanna is our daughter now too," Jake added. "Her people are our people." Cochise was quiet for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "It is good that my daughter has found such loyalty in her adopted family. Now tell me about these peace talks. What do the soldiers offer?" For the next hour, as stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ayanna explained the potential framework for negotiations. She spoke about reservation lands with guaranteed hunting rights, about schools where Apache children could learn English while keeping their cultural identity, and about the possibility of Apache scouts serving in the Army as equals rather than subordinates. When she finished, the 3 Apache leaders conferred in their native language. Finally, Cochise spoke again. "These terms are better than any the Army has offered before. But words spoken under the stars are not the same as words written on paper and signed by officials. How do we know these promises will be kept?" "You don't," Ayanna admitted, "just as the Army doesn't know if Apache leaders will honor their promises to end raids. Peace requires trust, and trust requires someone to take the first step." Geronimo, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "And you believe we should take that first step?" "I believe we should take it together," Ayanna replied. "Apache representatives and Army officers, meeting as equals to discuss the future of this territory. Not as conquerors and conquered, but as people who want to live in peace." Victorio shook his head. "Too many of our young men want war. They have seen their families killed and their land stolen. They will not easily accept peace with their enemies." "Then we must show them that peace offers something better than war," Ayanna said. "Hope for their children instead of endless grief." A chance to rebuild instead of constant destruction. Cochise looked at his daughter with pride. You speak with the wisdom of the elders, my daughter. Very well. I will agree to send representatives to these peace talks. But know this. If the soldiers prove false, if this is a trick to discover our locations or weaken our defenses, then the war will continue until every Apache warrior is dead. I understand, Father. I wouldn't ask you to trust the army if I didn't believe these talks could lead to real peace. As the Apache leaders prepared to leave, Cochise embraced his daughter one last time. You have become something new, my daughter. Not fully Apache, not fully white, but something that belongs to both worlds. Perhaps that is what this land needs. People who can build bridges between enemies. Watching her father ride away into the darkness, Ayanna felt the full weight of what she had set in motion. In 1 month, representatives of two peoples who had been killing each other for decades would sit down together to talk about peace. The fate of thousands of lives, Apache and white, would depend on her ability to help them understand each other. She had come a long way from the dying child Jake and Martha had found by their creek 7 years ago. Now she was about to attempt something that could change the history of the American West. The scared little girl had become a diplomat, and the real test of everything she had learned was about to begin. The peace talks were scheduled to begin at Canyon de Chelly on the first day of autumn 1889. For Ayanna, the month leading up to the negotiations passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. She found herself caught between two worlds that were both eager for peace and deeply suspicious of each other's motives. From the army side, she faced constant questions and challenges. Colonel Bradford assigned her to work with Captain Hayes and a team of officers to develop the military's negotiating strategy. Many of the older soldiers openly doubted that any Apache leader could be trusted to honor a peace agreement. These savages have broken every treaty they've ever signed, complained Major Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with scars from Apache arrows. Why should this time be any different? Because this time they're negotiating from a position of strength rather than defeat, Ayanna explained patiently. Previous treaties were forced on Apache leaders after military defeats. They signed because they had no choice, not because they believed in the terms. These talks are different. Both sides are choosing to negotiate. Captain Hayes supported her efforts, but even he had concerns. Ayanna, I respect what you're trying to accomplish, but you need to understand the political realities. There are people in Washington who don't want peace with the Apache. Some politicians and businessmen profit from this war. Suppliers who sell equipment to the army, contractors who build forts, politicians who get votes by promising to solve the Indian problem with force. Then we'll have to prove that peace is more profitable than war, Ayanna replied. A peaceful territory attracts more settlers, more investment, more business than one that's constantly at war. Meanwhile, her contacts with Apache leaders revealed equally difficult challenges. Not all Apache bands were willing to participate in the talks. Some war chiefs, particularly among the younger warriors, viewed any negotiation with the army as surrender and betrayal. 2 weeks before the scheduled talks, Ayanna received disturbing news from an Apache scout. A group of Chiricahua warriors led by a fiery young chief named Naiche had attacked a stagecoach near Tombstone, killing 3 passengers and taking 2 women captive. The raid threatened to derail the peace negotiations before they could begin. Colonel Bradford was furious when he heard the news. This is exactly what I expected, he told Ayanna in his office. The Apache can't control their own warriors. How can we negotiate with people who can't speak for all their fighters?
Sir, the army has the same problem, Ayanna pointed out.
There are soldiers and settlers who attack Apache on sight, regardless of orders or treaties. War creates its own momentum on both sides. Are you suggesting we cancel the talks? Ayanna took a deep breath. No, sir. I'm suggesting we use this incident to demonstrate that both sides are serious about peace. Let me go to Naiche's band and try to negotiate the release of the captives. If I can bring them back safely and convince Naiche to stop his raids, it will show that Apache leaders can control their warriors when they choose to. Bradford studied her face. That's an extremely dangerous mission. Naiche is one of the most hostile Apache chiefs in the territory. He's never shown any interest in peace talks, which is exactly why this mission is important, Ayanna replied. If I can reach him, if I can make him understand that peace offers more than war, then other hostile bands might listen too. After much discussion, Bradford agreed to let her try. but he insisted that she take an escort of cavalry soldiers. "I won't send you alone into Apache territory," he said firmly. "Sir, a military escort will make Nietzsche think this is a trick. He'll never agree to talk if he sees soldiers." "Then what do you suggest?" Ayanna smiled. "I suggest I take my real family with me. Jake and Martha Henderson have been living peacefully with Apache for 7 years. Their presence will show that this is a genuine peace mission, not a military operation." When Ayanna explained the plan to Jake and Martha, they didn't hesitate. "Of course we'll go with you," Martha said immediately. "We've come this far together and we're not stopping now." Jake was more cautious. "Are you sure about this, Ayanna? Nietzsche has a reputation for killing white prisoners. If we're captured, then we die together as a family," Ayanna said simply, "but I don't think it will come to that. Nietzsche may be angry, but he's not stupid. He knows that killing peaceful negotiators would turn even sympathetic Apache bands against him." They set out at dawn 3 days later, riding toward the Dragoon Mountains where Nietzsche's band was believed to be hiding. Ayanna led them through terrain that would have been impossible for anyone else to navigate. Hidden trails known only to Apache scouts, water sources that didn't appear on any army map, and defensive positions that had sheltered her people for generations. On the second day, they were found by Apache scouts who had been watching them since they entered the mountains. The scouts escorted them to a hidden canyon where Nietzsche had made his camp. The Apache chief was younger than Ayanna had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the lean build of a warrior and eyes that burned with anger. He wore traditional Apache clothing and war paint, and his long hair was decorated with eagle feathers that marked his status as a war leader. "So," he said in Apache as they approached his fire, "the little white girl who thinks she can make peace between enemies has come to visit." "I am Ayanna, daughter of Cochise the Younger," she replied formally. "I come seeking the return of captives taken in your raid on the white man's wagon." Nietzsche laughed harshly. "Why should I return captives to people who have murdered our women and children? Why should I show mercy to enemies who have shown none to us? Because mercy is what separates warriors from animals," Ayanna replied calmly. "And because returning these captives will prove that Apache leaders are honorable people who can be trusted in negotiations." "Negotiations?" Nietzsche spat. "You mean surrender? You want us to crawl before the white soldiers and beg for scraps of our own land?" Jake stepped forward, surprising everyone by speaking and halting Apache. Ayanna had been teaching him the language during their long rides together. "Chief Nietzsche, we are not soldiers. We are ranchers who have lived in peace with Apache people for many years. We have come because we believe there is a better way than endless war." Nietzsche studied Jake with curiosity. "You speak our language poorly, white man, but you speak it with respect. Why do you care what happens to Apache?" "Because this woman is our daughter," Martha said, also in Apache. "Her people are our people. When Apache children die in your war, we grieve. When white children die, we grieve. All death grieves us." The chief was quiet for several minutes studying the three of them. Finally, he gestured for them to sit by his fire. "Tell me about these peace talks," he said. "What lies are the soldiers telling this time?" For the next hour, Ayanna explained the proposed negotiations in detail. She spoke about the terms that had been discussed: designated hunting grounds, schools for Apache children, opportunities for Apache men to serve as army scouts and guides. But more than the specific terms, she talked about the bigger picture. "Nietzsche, how many Apache warriors are left?" she asked. "How many compared to 10 years ago? How many compared to when your grandfather was young?" The chief's face darkened. "Many have died. Too many. And how many white soldiers come to this territory every year? How many settlers? How many miners and ranchers? More every year," Nietzsche admitted reluctantly. "Then you know that we cannot win this war through fighting alone," Ayanna said gently. "Even if you killed every soldier in Arizona tomorrow, more would come from the east. Even if you drove out every white settler, more would arrive on the railroad." She leaned forward. "But what if instead of fighting all these people, we could make some of them our allies? What if we could use their laws and their government to protect Apache rights? What if we could ensure that Apache children learn both the old ways and the new skills they'll need to survive in the changing world?" Nietzsche was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "And what of honor?" he finally asked. "What of the warrior's path? What of revenge for our dead?" "Honor lies in protecting your people, not in dying uselessly," Ayanna replied. The warrior's path can lead to negotiations as well as to battle, and the best revenge against enemies who want to destroy us is to survive and prosper, despite their efforts. That evening, Nietzsche brought out the two captive women. They were scared but unharmed, a young Mexican woman named Isabella, and an older Anglo woman named Mrs. Patterson. Both had been traveling to join family members in Tucson when the stagecoach was attacked. These women have not been mistreated, Nietzsche assured Ayanna, but many of my warriors want to keep them as slaves or trade them for supplies. Convince me why I should give them up for nothing. Because releasing them will prove that you are a leader who thinks beyond immediate gain, Ayanna replied. When these women tell their stories, they will speak of an Apache chief who showed mercy even in war. Their words will carry weight in the negotiations. Nietzsche considered this. And if I release them, will you guarantee that I can send representatives to these peace talks? I will personally escort your representatives to Canyon de Chelly, Ayanna promised. They will be heard with the same respect as any other Apache leader. The chief made his decision. Very well. I will release the captives and I will send my war leader, Chato, to speak for our band at your peace talks. But understand this. If these talks prove to be a lie, if they are a trap to weaken or locate our forces, then I will hunt down everyone involved and kill them slowly. I understand, Ayanna said. I stake my life on the honor of both sides. The journey back to Fort Apache took 4 days, with the freed captives riding double with Jake and Martha. Both women were amazed by what they had witnessed, an Apache chief releasing prisoners because an Apache woman asked him to, and white ranchers risking their lives to make peace with their supposed enemies. I don't understand any of this, Mrs. Patterson confessed to Martha as they camped on the second night. Everything I've heard about the Apache says they're bloodthirsty savages who can't be reasoned with. Everything you've heard comes from people who've never tried to reason with them, Martha replied. Yes, there are Apache warriors who are our enemies. But there are also Apache people who want peace as much as we do. The trick is telling the difference. When they arrived at Fort Apache, the successful release of the captives created a sensation. Newspaper reporters who had come to cover the peace talks wrote stories about the remarkable young Apache woman who could walk into hostile camps and negotiate the freedom of prisoners. But the attention also brought new dangers. 3 days before the talks were scheduled to begin, Ayanna received a warning from Captain Hayes. There are people here who don't want these negotiations to succeed, he told her quietly. I've heard rumors of plans to disrupt the talks, maybe even to assassinate Apache representatives. Who would do such a thing? Ayanna asked, though she suspected she already knew. The same people who've been profiting from this war, Hayes replied. Contractors who supply the army, politicians who build their careers on fighting Indians, settlers who want Apache land regardless of any treaties. What can we do? Be very careful about who you trust, and be prepared for the possibility that someone will try to sabotage the peace process. As the day of the talks approached, Ayanna felt the weight of history pressing down on her. In just a few days, she would stand between two peoples who had been killing each other for decades and try to help them find a path to peace. Everything she had learned in her two families, Apache and White, would be tested in the most important negotiations of her life. The scared child who had once lain dying by a creek had become a diplomat who carried the hopes of thousands. But she had also become a target for those who preferred war to peace. The greatest challenge of her life was about to begin, and failure would mean not just the continuation of a terrible war, but possibly her own death and the deaths of everyone she loved. In 3 days at Canyon de Chelly, she would discover whether 7 years of preparation had made her ready for this moment, or whether the forces of hatred and greed would prove stronger than the hope for peace. 20 years later, in the autumn of 1909, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon of the Henderson Ranch. Jake, now 48 and graying at the temples, shaded his eyes against the morning sun as he watched the approaching riders. Martha, standing beside him on the porch of their expanded ranch house, counted at least 30 horses in the group. Apache, she said simply, recognizing the distinctive riding style and the way the riders moved in perfect formation across the desert landscape. More Apache than we've seen together in years, Jake replied, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the porch rail, not from fear but from old habit. The Henderson Ranch had remained neutral territory throughout all the conflicts of the past 2 decades. But such a large group was unusual. As the riders drew closer, they could see that these were not painted warriors on a raid. The Apache wore a mixture of traditional clothing and military-style uniforms. They carried rifles with military precision, and their horses were well-trained cavalry mounts rather than wild mustangs. At their head rode a figure that made both Jake and Martha catch their breath. Ayanna sat her horse with the bearing of a military commander, wearing a uniform that seemed to blend Apache and U.S. Army elements. Her long black hair was braided with eagle feathers and silver ornaments, and across her chest were decorations that spoke of high rank and distinguished service. She was no longer the young woman who had left the ranch 20 years ago to attend the peace talks at Canyon de Chelly. This was a leader, a warrior, and something entirely new in the American West. "My God," Martha whispered, "look what she's become." The peace talks at Canyon de Chelly in 1889 had been partially successful. Ayanna had managed to negotiate a treaty that ended major hostilities between the Army and several Apache bands, including her father's group. But the agreement had been fragile, undermined by extremists on both sides who preferred war to compromise. For 5 years, Ayanna had served as the chief liaison between Apache communities and territorial authorities, helping to maintain an uneasy peace. She had established schools where Apache children learned English alongside their traditional languages, had helped Apache men find work as Army scouts and guides, and had mediated countless disputes between settlers and tribal groups. But in 1894, everything had changed. A corrupt Indian agent named Samuel Morrison, Lieutenant Morrison's brother, had been caught stealing supplies meant for Apache families and selling weapons to Mexican revolutionaries. When Apache leaders demanded his removal, Morrison had responded by organizing a massacre at an Apache settlement near Globe, claiming it was a military action against hostile Indians. The massacre had shattered the fragile peace. Ayanna's father, Cochise the Younger, had been among the victims, gunned down while trying to protect Apache children. The sight of her father's body had transformed Ayanna from a diplomat into something harder and more dangerous, a military strategist with intimate knowledge of both Apache fighting methods and American military tactics. She had disappeared into the mountains with the surviving members of her father's band, and for 3 years, no one had seen or heard from her. The Army had assumed she was dead. Jake and Martha had grieved for the daughter they thought they had lost, but Ayanna had not died. Instead, she had been busy creating something unprecedented in Apache history, a unified military force that combined warriors from different bands under a single command structure. She had spent those 3 years traveling throughout the southwest and northern Mexico, visiting Apache, Navajo, and other tribal groups, building alliances and training fighters. When she emerged from the mountains in 1897, it was at the head of a disciplined army of nearly 300 Native American warriors. But instead of launching raids against white settlements, she had done something that shocked both the military and tribal leaders. She had offered her services to the United States government as a professional military contractor. The Spanish-American War had just begun, and the Army desperately needed experienced fighters who could operate in difficult terrain. Ayanna's Apache Corps, as they came to be known, had proven themselves invaluable in Cuba, where their tracking skills and ability to fight in tropical conditions had helped secure several important victories. After the war, they had been deployed to the Philippines to help suppress the insurrection there. Ayanna's unique blend of Native American warrior traditions and modern military tactics had made her famous throughout the Army. She had been promoted to the rank of Major, the first Native American woman ever to hold such a position in the U.S. military. Now, in 1909, she was returning home for the first time in 20 years, and she was not alone. The column of riders halted 50 yards from the ranch house. Ayanna dismounted and walked forward alone, her movements graceful and confident. Jake and Martha came down from the porch to meet her, and for a moment, the three of them simply looked at each other across the years that had passed. "Hello, Papa Jake," Ayanna said softly, using the childhood name she had called him. "Hello, Mama Martha." Martha burst into tears and ran forward to embrace her adopted daughter. Jake followed more slowly, his eyes taking in the changes that 20 years of war and command had brought to the girl they had raised. "Look at you," Martha said through her tears. "Look what you've become." I became what this land needed me to become, Ayana replied, returning the embrace. But I never forgot who taught me that family is more important than anything else. Jake reached them and pulled both women into his arms. We thought you were dead, he said gruffly. For years we heard nothing. We didn't know if you had been killed in the mountains or had simply decided that your white family was no longer important to you. You are the most important thing in my life, Ayana assured him. But there were things I had to do, debts I had to pay. My father died believing in the peace we had tried to build. I couldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. She gestured toward the mounted warriors waiting nearby. These men and women have followed me through 3 wars and a dozen battles. They have earned the respect of generals and politicians who once thought of Indians as nothing but obstacles to be removed. We have proven that Native Americans can be partners rather than enemies of the United States. And now? Martha asked. What brings you home now? Ayana's expression grew serious. Because there's going to be another war, and this time it will be bigger than anything the world has ever seen. The European powers are building armies and forming alliances that will soon tear each other apart. When that happens, America will be drawn in and the country will need every skilled soldier it can find. Jake frowned. You think America will fight in a European war? I know it will, Ayana replied. I've been working with military intelligence for the past 5 years. I've seen the reports from our agents in Europe, the buildup of weapons and troops, the treaties and betrayals. War is coming, probably within the next 5 years. She looked back at her mounted command. When it comes, the Apache Corps will be ready. We've learned to fight in jungles and deserts, in mountains and cities. We've mastered modern weapons while keeping our traditional skills. We will serve America as we have for the past 12 years. But first, she continued, turning back to Jake and Martha, I wanted to come home. I wanted to see the place where I learned that enemies can become family, that peace is possible even between the most different peoples. Martha wiped her eyes. How long can you stay? A week, Ayana replied. Long enough to rest, to remember who I was before I became who I am, and to ask for your blessing for what I plan to do next. What are you planning? Jake asked, though something in her,